Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode of the We Love Sports Movies podcast. I'm your host, Matt Blaustein. I'm joined here today by my co-host, Jacob Aframian.
Thank you, Matt. I'm glad to be here today. So this podcast, with this being the first episode, I want to talk about this podcast in general and what we're going to be doing going forward. So this podcast is about two people that love talking about sports movies. You know, obviously we both love sports and we love movies, so we feel like what's the best way to put that together? And this is the conclusion that we came to, and that's why the title is We Love Sports Movies, because that's what it's about. It's about two guys that love sports movies. And hopefully around weekly, we're going to be talking about a new movie each week, and we're going to break it down in many sorts of ways, whether it's good, whether it's bad. And that's going to be the plan from here on out. So we can't wait to see what you all think of this one.
All right, thanks, Jacob. So our movie today that we're going to be covering is Remember the Titans. It's a movie about the integration of the T.C. Williams high school football team in 1971 and how one team grows a brotherhood, even with racism on the outside, to grow even larger than the football field. So what do you think about this movie, Jacob?
Well, I personally love this movie. I think it's an incredible movie considering all the elements to it. You got a great lead with Denzel Washington playing Coach Herman Boone. You got solid supporting characters of a lot of really solid young actors like Wood Harris, Ryan Hurst, who played Gary Bertier, and of course Ryan Gosling, who has a very small role in this, but I mean he still manages to shine when he's on camera. And it's a great analysis of characters. It's just, again, it's a great story, and it's like a fun ride. And even though it's like around 2 hours, it doesn't feel like it's 2 hours. It really goes by fast, and there's just so many great elements to this movie that make it rewatchable as well. And that's obviously why we're here talking about it today.
And I agree with a lot of those points. I think your point about how it's 2 hours but it doesn't feel like it is really a testament to how well this movie is made and how nicely it runs. I agree with all your points. The casting is really nice, and it's a really good movie to watch. Okay, so let's get into some key scenes. So the first scene that we want to cover was the gym scene, which happens early on in the movie. So what happens in the gym scene, Jake?
So the scene, it's kind of like the orientation of the team. It's basically about people that are going to try out for the team. And because there was such an uproar after this school integrated in this kind of like racist area of Virginia, Alexandria to be exact. This is the tryout at like the high school gym, and Coach Herman Boone and his assistant is there, and it's only black players there. And then this one white guy shows up, Louis Lastic, who we learn to love because he's such a fun-loving guy. But the reason it's practically all black players, it's because the white players don't want to play for Coach Boone. They want to play for their old coach, Coach Yost, who ends up being the assistant. And immediately, as soon as Coach Boone walks in the door, he tells Petey Jones, played by Donald Faison, that this is not about having fun. This is about playing football, and this is about being perfect, and this is about playing for me because I'm going to be a tyrant, and you're going to learn you may not like it, but you're going to respect it. And he has this whole thing with Petey where he goes like, he's like, is football fun? No, it's not fun. Not anymore, is it? No, not even a little bit. Like that whole thing where he just scares him. He scares the you-know-what out of him.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like him imposing his authority. This is my team, and we're going to do things my way.
And I really like that scene as well. I think an interesting thing is what happens kind of at the very end of the scene where all the white football players and their parents and Coach Yost come into the locker room. And it feels almost like an intimidation tactic from Yost and the other players to kind of say, look, we don't think you belong here. He was here first, and we're not happy about this coaching change. I think that's something that is really interesting considering where the team goes in a matter of about like 20 minutes. But at this point in the movie, it's a very glaring showing of the racism in Alexandria at the time.
Yep. And then next scene is we're going to talk about
the midnight jog and the Gettysburg. So
you talk
want me to talk about?
You talk about the midnight jog, and I'll talk about the Gettysburg.
Okay. So Coach Boone wakes all the players up at 3 a.m. on, I think, what's their fourth day at camp. and
Yeah.
says that they're going to go on a midnight jog. Coach Yost objects because Coach Yost says it's ridiculous to have the players going on 3 a.m. jog. This isn't like the military. This is a football team. But Coach Boone, regardless, takes them on a jog. They jog through the woods. Players are exhausted, and they finally get to a war cemetery, which Boone announces to be Gettysburg. And what does he say further, Jacob?
So they have like this very long run. I think that lasts at least a few hours because it's like when they leave, it's like 3 to 4 a.m. And when they're there, it's the sun's out and it's like a clear present day. And they're all like sweating like profusely because, they've been running miles through this forest. And then when they're there, Coach Boone talks about how this was where the Battle of Gettysburg was. And that was obviously during the Civil War when there was still like massive amounts of segregation and stuff like that with the Union and the Confederacy. And he talks about how he makes a connection with how, like with the black and the white players on the team, you don't have to like each other, but you will respect each other because that's the most important thing for them to start winning. And I think that's an incredible point because that's like one of the scenes that kind of puts them, like, connects them all together when there's still clearly a lot of tension between the two races of players on the teams. And I think it's like a turning point in the movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with all that. I think also this is where you get a lot of character development from not just Boone, but from a bunch of the players on the team. You're going to see in the next few minutes afterwards, there's a lot of stuff with the players and how they grow more together and how they learn to respect each other, even if, they're not super buddy-buddy with each other. They've learned to respect each other and what each other have gone through. So let's talk about the next scene. Let's talk about there are actually two scenes, but they evolve throughout the movie, and that's the scenes at the bar. So what happens at the bar, Jake?
What happens at the bar is I'm trying to remember what game this is after. It's not after the first game. I'm pretty sure it's after like
I think it was the Ronnie Bass game. After
the Ronnie Bass game where Ronnie Bass comes in for Rev or oh god, what's his name? His name is Rev was played by Jerry Harris, who was the quarterback, and he gets hurt, and Ronnie Sunshine Bass comes in. And after the game, it's like they want to have a really fun time out on the town. And Ronnie Bass is like, let's go to this restaurant or this bar or whatever. And it's more of a restaurant. It has like that bar atmosphere to it. And the two black players on the team, it's like a Blue and Petey are like, no, we are not going in there because it's like they know that how it is around their neck of the woods. Ronnie Bass doesn't because he's from California, and I would say that the race tension is not nearly as bad there as it is in Virginia. And as soon as they get in there, the owner is like, "You're gonna have to get, like, we're full when they're not full," as Ronnie Bass realizes, and he's just not the coach, the restaurant owner goes like, he isn't really, he isn't talk about how like the two black guys, that's the reason why they can't eat, but he basically implies this well best as he can. He talks about how like, you're not eating in my restaurant, and then that leads to the two PD and Blue being like embarrassed by Ronnie Bass because they like, don't humiliate us like that again, because it's like they kept warning him and he didn't want to listen to them. So that's, I think, also very important.
And that's a really important scene considering what happens later at the bar, because it's very interesting to see Ronnie Bass, who comes in as an outsider from California. And it's really interesting, too, to see that Ronnie Bass, even though he's white, he's not really liked by a lot of the Virginians in Alexandria because people think that he's this hippie kid from California and, his views of thinking are obviously a lot more liberal and he's a lot more chill than a lot of the people in Virginia are. But so later in the movie, Ronnie Bass's dad comes with Ronnie and the whole team to the bar, and Ronnie lets it slip to the owner after the owner says, no, you're not allowed to come in, and, brandishes a bat at them. Ronnie says, my dad is friends with a bunch of people in the Justice League, and if you don't let us sit down, he knows a bunch of people that will effectively get this bar shut down. And so they are allowed to sit down. And a bunch of the patrons get up and leave because they don't support, black players being allowed to eat with white players and eat, in the same restaurant as white people. But for the people who don't leave, they chant na 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 na, hey hey, goodbye, which is very important for where the movie goes later on.
Yep, it's a good hint. Yeah. Okay.
All right, so let's talk about the locker room scenes. So first point is about Louis. So Louis Lastic in this movie, what do you have to say about him, Jake?
So yeah, Louis Lastic, played by Ethan Suplee, is this fun-loving, big old white guy who immediately comes in and he's all about spreading. He's kind of like Ronnie Bass, just not as much of a quote-unquote hippie as Ronnie Bass is because he's from the neck of the woods, pretty much, just probably from like the other side of town.
Bayonne, I think.
Yeah. Oh no, that's I think that's New Jersey.
That actually probably is New Jersey. Yeah.
That's New Jersey. So he's like, I mean, that's not super close, but it's closer than California. And anyway, Louis Lastic is like this guy. He has a lot of respect for people because I think he has relatives in the service. And he immediately just wants to connect with everybody because he's like, I have nothing to lose. I have no prejudices. I'm brand new here. He's like, I'll take any friend I can get. And then it takes a little bit of time, but the white players, I mean, not the white players, excuse me, the black players immediately kind of embrace him because they're like, all right, this guy's cool. You know, he isn't not like us. He's, chill. And I think that his spirit, it kind of reflects the movie in general because it's about, like, again, fun loving, passion. And that's important because that's a big part of this movie as well.
Yeah, I think Louis' characterization is very important to this movie because he's really the first player to accept black players and, make them his friends and go out of his way to make everyone his friend because Louis really has no prejudice. And it becomes really apparent later on why he doesn't have it because he says that, none of his family has been to college and, he's failing his classes and Coach Boone immediately gets on it and helps Louis. And, later on, Louis ends up getting a C+, which allows him to pass and qualify for college. But Louis is really the first player to kind of break that racial barrier and outwardly reach out to black players on the team and, spend time with them. So I think that's a really, really good scene. Just the collection of scenes for Louis. Also, Ain't No Mountain High. So what happens with Ain't No Mountain High in the locker room?
So yeah, obviously Matt is referencing the great Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell song "Ain't No Mountain High Enough," and the reason that that's important is because it's like once they play that song in the locker room during training camp, and it's important because it kind of like it gets like one of the white players, Alan, played by Ryan Gosling, is kind of like dancing because he's getting into the song, and it's like, what's his name, Louis, and some of the other black players like Blue are singing the song together. People are getting a massive kick out of it and stuff like that because it's kind of like, it's like black and white forming relationships. And that whole locker room scene is important because it's like there's like a bunch of yo mama jokes and it's like they were telling one to Gary and he just doesn't get them at all.
Gary doesn't understand it, and Gary was going to go beat up, I think, Petey.
Yeah, he was like, what?
And then Julius was like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah.
This is something that happens with us.
Yeah.
And then Louis again pops in, and Louis says, dang, my back hurts so bad, Petey, because it must have your mom on me.
That was
like your mom weighs twice as much as I do, or something like that.
That was hilarious.
Yeah, and that was a great scene. Also very interesting because you kind of see every single player is on board with this except for Ray.
Yeah, Ray. Ray the racist, played by some guy.
Burgess Jenkins.
Yeah, Burgess. That's a name.
And I think that it's really interesting because Ray's whole character is effectively that one racist friend. And I think Ray leaving the team was pretty much a motif for racism leaving the team.
Yeah,
because
it's a great point.
Because Ray not being on board with, Ain't No Mountain High Enough in the locker room, being the only one who doesn't, vibe along to the music. And
he basically doesn't even want to block for his black teammates, basically.
No, he goes out of his way. He goes out of his way not to.
As a tight end, he's like more of a blocking tight end. He goes out of his way not to block for his black teammates. But as soon as Ronnie Sunshine Bass comes in, he's like turns into like Gronkowski or something.
Exactly.
And I don't mean to cut you off. I'm just saying that the reason that him getting cut from the team is so important is because it was his best friend that did it. That's very important, as in Gary we're talking about here.
That's the biggest plot point, I think, in the movie for Gary. Because I think Gary, to be able to come to his senses and realize that Ray is a racist and that he's going to do nothing but make hell for the black players on the team and finally cut him, is big at kind of Gary realizing that, how awful racism is and cutting ties with racism effectively and being more open.
And with his girlfriend as well.
And with his girlfriend, because after this scene, he takes nothing from his girlfriend. If she says anything mildly racist, he's not really cool with it. And we don't see his girlfriend reappear until the championship game. But this scene's really good just to see Gary's character development.
Okay.
Okay, and
What was
let's
the
talk
next
about
scene we're
the
gonna talk about?
next scene is the semifinal championship game. So what happens in the semifinal championship game,
So what
Jacob?
happens in the semifinal championship game is the Titans, as you know, TC Williams Titans. They're going up against a really tough team. I'll be honest, the name escapes my head, but before that, there's the coach of the opposing team. Basically, he says something pretty racially insensitive. He refers to Coach Boone in the name of an animal that's racist towards African Americans. And when Boone realizes that, he's like, okay, you're going down. Like, it's personal now. Like, when you get that racist, you know, it's not going to end well for you.
Yeah.
And that's what happens in that game, because it's like, it's like as soon as during that game, it's like, and another thing is that that's the game where the refs are trying to basically, throw the game. They're calling bad calls so that the Titans will lose because they want Coach Yost back in somehow, right?
And the whole scheme is, so Coach Yost has been nominated to the Virginia State High School Sports Hall of Fame and Athletic Hall of Fame because he's had, I think at this point, was it 15 winning seasons? I'm not sure. It was.
Yeah, he was dominant.
He was incredibly dominant. Yeah, and so basically they said on one condition he can be put into the Hall of Fame, and that's that he has to lose one game this year. But Coach Boone has already been told that he's going to be fired as coach if he loses one game. So it's all a scheme for Yost to get back in. And when Yost realizes during the game that the refs are throwing the game, Coach Yost decides, you know what, the Hall of Fame isn't really worth it if it's run by these racists, and I want to make sure that Boone keeps his job because I have a lot of respect for him. So Yost goes out and tells the referee that he knows about the whole scheme and that he will go to the papers and report everything on it, and he doesn't care about his Hall of Fame bid anymore. And the referee says, you're crazy, what about the Hall of Fame? And he says, screw the Hall of Fame, call the game fair. And so the game is called fair, and the Titans effectively shut out the other team. And after the game, Coach Yost is approached by the chairman of the Hall of Fame, where he says, good job, you're never going to get into the Hall of Fame now.
And you just crossed yourself for the Hall of Fame. And he was upset, but he's like, you know what, screw them. And the thing is, it's more his daughter that's upset. His daughter we haven't talked about yet, who's like, she like just flat out loves football. She's like the ultimate tomboy. And, she's the one that's really upset that he didn't get in the Hall of Fame because she wants that for her dad very badly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also during after the championship game with Coach Boone walking trying to shake the hands of the opposing coach, and the opposing coach won't shake his hand because Boone is black. And Boone tells the opposing coach, hey, got something for you. And he tosses him a banana. Just as a nice callback to what he was called by the opposing coach on TV. And the opposing coach immediately understands, nods his head, and then walks away in shame.
Yeah. Which is just flat out the ultimate troll job.
Yeah.
I mean, flat out to the people that thought of that in the script or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And then, so the next scene is Gary's car crash. So what happens with that, Jake?
So after they win the semifinal, they're going to the final. They realize that they're going to be in the championship. Gary, since, he doesn't really – he has friends, but really – and he was well-liked for the most part, but really his only real friend was Julius, minus his racist friends. Everyone liked him and, it's Gary Berthier because he's the all-state, all-American linebacker and all that stuff. But he really only had one friend after he cut ties with his racist friends, and that was Julius. And he wanted to hang out with Julius to celebrate. But Julius wanted to be with his girlfriend. He's like, man, come on, I got to be with my girl tonight, man. He's like, yeah, you're right. He's like, and they were like, where are you going? He's like, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm just going to go. Because I guess he wanted to enjoy that moment himself. So Gary in his Camaro, his very fancy car, is just taking a stroll down the main road. And people are just going crazy seeing him. And he's like, putting a fist in the air, all that stuff. And he's like embracing all the love. And then what his problem was that he points to just one random guy. And he points at him like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, he has like this, yeah look in his face. But the problem is he
accidentally hits the throttle.
Yeah, pretty hard. And he's looking the other way. and he has no idea, and like this truck just whams him.
So he gets T-boned in the driver's side door. So, and then there's a, fade to black instantly, and it cuts back to a hospital scene, and Julius is walking in, and everyone is there. Every single player on the team is there. Gary's mom is there. Gary's relatives are there. Parents of the players on the team are there. Boone is there. Yost is there. And so Julius instantly walks up to Gary's mom and is like, "I'm so sorry. What's wrong? Is he okay?" And Gary's mom gives him a hug and says, "Gary only wants to see you."
And that's very important because Gary's mom was also very racist, and she's like, "Can you know what your dad would have thought if he saw you with these people and stuff like that, like saying racist things."
Yep.
And that's important because it's like she fully embraces Julius at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Julius walks up to Boone and he asks Boone, is it bad? Is it bad? And Boone's kind of hesitant to tell him at first. And he's like, he's paralyzed from the waist down. And Julius breaks down. And then Julius goes in to see Gary. And the nurse says, "Sorry, only family allowed in here." And Gary's like, "Alice, don't you see the resemblance? He's obviously my brother."
Yeah.
And
that's a funny moment and almost a tearjerker because it kind of gets you emotional to see kind of how far they've come. They've officially come full circle. In the beginning, they couldn't stand each other. They were on the bus and they couldn't stand just the sight of each other. They barely room with each other, and they really became brothers. They were like brothers from other mothers, and it was a really special moment at that point.
Yeah. And then, I think that's pretty much all that sums up the scene. It's a very, very heartwarming scene because Julius and Gary kind of talk at his bedside. And, Gary's all worried about the championship game. And he's like, you have to worry about the championship game. And then eventually the rest of the team comes in and I don't remember if it was Coach Boone or Coach Yost. I think it was Coach Yost. And he's like, "Gary, there are bigger things than football right now." And Gary can't really realize that. And he's like, "No, you have to be worried about the championship game." And that really shows how selfless Gary
and what
is.
he says is like, I think he says, I wish I remember this, but he's like, "Coach, I'm hurt. I'm not dead." You know what I mean? Tell him that, like, his spirit is still going to be with them.
Exactly. Yeah.
The biggest problem, and I know this is like kind of getting into like nitpicks before, but the biggest problem with this whole scene is that I'm pretty sure that in real life, Gary got into this accident after the championship game.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, but that's what we can talk about with like inconsistencies later on.
And we'll get to that later.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the next scene, the last play of the championship game. So what happens there?
So, all right. Forgive me because the scene is just so. I mean, I know this is high school football. This is not the NFL because if this is this isn't even college. I don't even know if it's happening in college, for crying out loud. But so basically, it's like they need they're down by, what is it? I forgot what they're down by.
I want to say 3.
Is it like it was like 10-7? I feel like.
Yeah, they're down by 3. It's 10-7. Yeah.
Because it was a very low scoring, tough affair. And what they do is they have practically like 4 seconds left, and they're at like the 25-yard line, their own 25-yard line.
Yeah.
And what happens is they don't know what play to run. Boone's out of ideas because in the beginning we didn't get over this, and I'll talk about this in nitpicks. But he's like, "I run 6 plays." That's a direct quote, and I will get to that in nitpicks. But anyway, what happens is Boone decides, I'm going to use one of Yost's trick plays that he talked to me about before, but I didn't want to listen to it. But he's like, "No, I want to do it," because he's like, he thinks it's going to work. So he's like, and you know what? He's just like, "Screw it.
Yeah.
This is it." So what they do is they run basically like an end around pitch, which is like, which is like either like a wide.
And they have Rev run it.
Yeah, the backup quarterback who was an afterthought because of Ronnie Bass, and then people thought like he was hurt. And like the opposing coach is like, "Isn't he hurt?" And they thought he was going to throw a long, but it ends up being an end around. And for some reason, the defense just can't comprehend that the quarterback who has good legs can run. And then they just have Ronnie Bass, who's like the ultimate tough guy quarterback, just basically like knocking people down head first, which is just incredibly dangerous. But this is the 70s, so no one cared back then.
Yeah.
And he's just like knocking people out with his head. And it's like, and that's also incredibly unrealistic because, I mean, there are a lot of tough quarterbacks, but a quarterback cannot field that many blocks. And it's just weird because it's like this is supposed to be like the best defense in the country, and they can't even figure out an end around. But obviously, for me to stop raining on the parade, the Titans win the game and the championship, and they had this whole incredible moment together, Boone and Yost, where Yost talks about like he's like, "What you do with these boys? I just can't believe it." He's like, "You were the right man for the job." And then maybe the best line in the movie is when Boone says back to Yost, "You're a Hall of Famer in my book," and he like gives him the game ball. And
And
that's basically the movie.
Yeah, and they hold it up in the air, and it's kind of symbolic with kind of the night lights shining back down on them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the movie cuts to what I think is it's 10 years in the future, and it's 1981, and it's at a cemetery.
Before that.
Yeah,
right before that, what they pretty sure that. Oh wait, was that? I can't remember. This is before or after because it's like they have the credits. No, you know what?
No, credits is after.
Okay.
Yeah. So 10 years in the future, they're at a funeral, and a funeral actually opened up the movie, but we don't know who it's for, and we didn't know any of the characters at that point. And then it becomes apparent with the voiceover from a grown-up Cheryl, that it's actually a funeral for Gary Bertier, who was actually killed in another car accident 10 years later down the road.
He's only 27 or something like that, which is just absolutely tragic.
It was tragic. It was with a drunk driver on the highway. And so they're all at the funeral, and Julius is standing arm in arm with Gary's mom, who's absolutely beside herself. And Julius begins to start a rendition of "Na Na Na Hey Hey Goodbye," but a very devastating, mournful one.
I think the thing about that scene is, even though you talk about it's obviously devastating and mournful, a lot of those people are very strong in that scene. Like they're very composed. They're not crying. They just feel like they want to be resilient for Gary because that's how Gary would have been.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like they have every player touch the grave and stuff like that and pay their very fast respects and all that stuff. And it's a nice way to close out the movie.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into what we like and what we don't like about this movie. So what do you like and not like about this movie, Jake?
Well, since we kind of already talked about this before, we'll talk about it again. I think what we like, or like at least what I like, is I think it's a great story. I'm glad that it was told. I love that it's a great way to combine football and race together, which are two very interesting topics. And I just think that the cast is great. Performances are really solid. I just love Denzel in this movie. I don't know if you could have had cast anyone better for that role. I really don't. I mean, I can't think of anybody. And I just think it's a great movie in that respect. And I think what I don't like about it is that the fact that it's a Disney movie makes it kind of like a puff race movie, and it's kind of like soft. Not that I'm not encouraging it it to be like more racist. I'm just saying that like it's not totally realistic in that sense. Yeah. And I don't like the fact that they made stuff up. Not that they exaggerated some of the stuff that happened. I don't like that.
Yeah, and I think I agree with a lot of your points about what you like. I think historical inconsistencies are a big thing about this movie that kind of pinches a nerve with me that I don't love about it. And it's probably the only thing about this movie that I don't love. For example, the fact that Coach Yost, in this movie, it displays that he only has one daughter, and that's Cheryl. He actually had 4 daughters, and Coach Yost actually was not happy. Like the real life Coach Yost was not happy about this casting choice.
Yeah. Apparently, like, I didn't mean to cut you off, but apparently like the other daughters didn't even care that much.
Yeah, the other daughters didn't care a lot, and the reason why Cheryl was featured so prominently is because she didn't really have a say in it because she died in 1996 from a heart-related issue.
Wow,
so
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so Coach Yost was very confused as to why only Cheryl was in this movie, and also it came out that Cheryl wasn't the big football mastermind. Like she liked football, but she wasn't like oh, I know every single play. Oh, I know how to stack the line and get them to pressure the quarterback.
Yeah.
Also, another thing about this is that other schools were already integrated in the district at this time. So really the T.C. Williams team was really working to show their town, not, as a matter of fact, every single other team.
It's practically the opposite of the whole plot. Exactly. I mean, not the whole plot, but it was the opposite of the whole meat and gravy of the movie, which is the whole base of it, which is all about like we integrated first. It's like, no, you integrated last. Like it's exact opposite.
Yeah, so it's very Disney-fied in that regard.
Yeah.
And also another thing is that in a very pivotal scene in the movie where a brick is thrown through Coach Boone's window, actually a toilet was thrown through his window at that time, which,
It's just, I mean, it just shows how racist Virginia really was at that point.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some key characters. So I think Coach Boone's a great character, but I think Coach Yost is the more interesting character of the two because his transformation over the entire movie is very interesting because, he kind of starts out and he's not really open-minded. And, he's a winning coach and he's got a pretty big ego about him with, oh, I've, been so dominant, my daughter, calls all the plays.
His daughter kind of puffs up his ego when
Exactly.
you think about it even more than because he's kind of like mild-mannered, like cool, as like they say in the South. He's very chill.
Yeah.
He's just like an easy breezy human being.
And I think, honestly, Cheryl is another low point of this movie for me because I think she's a good character at points, but a lot of the time it gets carried away. And it's
I agree.
I think that she actually takes away from the movie in some aspects. Not to say that, Hayden Panettiere's performance as Cheryl is, it's a great performance because, she was doing what she was given. But it's very, it brings down the more serious-ish tone where, oh, we're having this serious moment on the football field, and then we pan away to Cheryl freaking out on the bleachers and stomping around about how, oh no, I can't believe that's happening. Oh no, the refs are, calling bad game. Like she's basically the viewer.
I mean, it's like every single
thing. And I think that is probably the main thing, which I think Cheryl actually is probably the reason why I can't call it my favorite sports movie of all time.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's something.
Which is big. And it's not even that she's inherently a bad character. It's that they go way overboard. Like if they had,
I agree.
If they had like maybe one or two cutaways for like one game, then yeah, that's fine. But she's like everywhere.
Yeah. I think a lot of that was because Hayden Panettiere was like a big child actress at the time, and everyone thought that she was going to blow up and stuff like that. So I think that they wanted to use her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another character that I want to talk about a lot is Ryan Gosling's character of Alan Mosley or Mosey or whatever. And this is interesting because this is not like Ryan Gosling now, like Hollywood heartthrob, all that stuff, like, very desirable, great dramatic and comedic actor and stuff like that. This is like still very young Ryan Gosling. Not a lot of people knew about him yet. And he's playing like this guy who he basically like he's a part of the team. He's like one of like the guys. He's like one of the cool white guys or whatever. And he is a very racist. His father is kind of like the definition of the racist.
His father is the racist of the area. He's the first one when Coach Yost announces that Coach Boone has taken over for him.
He's rhyming Coach Boone's last name with a very racial term.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's interesting about the whole Alan character is the fact that it's like his dad talks about it. He's like, my boy was all state last year, all blah, blah, blah. Like, cause I don't know if you remember that scene that he's like complaining because he gets benched at one point. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, because like in the movie, he's terrible. He's like a linebacker. He's like he's like
he's a cornerback.
He's a
cornerback.
He's a corner.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so he's a corner. Well, he's
a corner that can't cover. Yeah.
He can't cover squat. And his dad's like, why would you take my boy out the game? I'm like, and then Cheryl, of course, it's like, can't cover squat. Come on now, And it's like, I find what's interesting about Ryan Gosling is that it's kind of him being himself, or just like, I'm like the pretty boy who just wants to dance all the time. And he's just like, like he's always the one that's like front and center of like all the times where they're having a good time partying.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. And he seems like he clearly doesn't want to play football. He's just like a kid that his dad forced him to play football when he really just wants to be part of the school play. And I just find that whole thing interesting.
Yeah. And then I think the last key characters that we should probably talk about are Julius Campbell and Gary Bertier and their friendship throughout the movie. So the movie literally opens with, riots against the police for killing an African-American in Alexandria. And it comes out later on that Julius was friends with them, but Julius is kind of leading the riots. And so Gary leaves his high school football practice with a bunch of his friends to kind of whip up trouble and, fight against the African-Americans who were protesting. only to get stopped by Coach Yost.
Yeah.
And then it moves on to when they start up. Julius is effectively the leader of the black players on the team, and Gary's effectively leader of the white players on the team. And so Gary and Julius do not get along.
Yeah.
They share a room at practice and training, and they immediately get into a fist fight because Gary doesn't like the black power flag that Julius hangs.
And it's not necessarily like it's not. I don't know if I do even describe it as a black power flag. It's more just it's the Olympic poster of three black men like Tommy Lewis.
Yeah,
and,
Tommy Smith and
yeah.
John Carlos Smith.
Yeah. And they're like putting their fists in the air as part of solidarity, as a protest.
Mm-hmm.
And Gary's just like, I don't want that in our room. He's like, I'm not looking at it for 2 weeks. And Julius like, I don't care if you look at it. He's like, you can look wherever for all I care. He used to immediately get into a fist fight. And I think it was smart of Boone to like put his offensive players and defensive players together on the bus and have them, integrate in that sense, because I think if that never happens, I don't think that they ever – I mean, if this is a fictional movie, right? If they don't integrate in that sense, I don't know if they would have ever gotten along.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, that's why Boone is such a genius, even though he's a tyrant and he's like times a very bad human being when he's like water is for cowards. That's just a horrible message to send.
Yeah.
And he's like, you mess up, he's like, you don't see height in 0.5 seconds, you run a mile. Like he's the definition of a tyrant. Like, let's put it fairly. Great coach, but a tyrant. And Yost is really the exact I would describe Coach Boone as kind of like Dennis Green, who is like the guy who has this rant, who's former NFL coach, who's like the Bears aren't who we thought they were, and he just going nuts. And he's kind of like John Gruden because he's very he's very fierce. He doesn't care about what anyone else thinks. He doesn't want to listen to anybody. He's like, I don't care whether you like it or not. Like that's this whole thing.
Yeah.
Where Yost is kind of like the former Cowboys coach and the former Oklahoma Sooners coach, Barry Switzer, who's very like, I'm just this, Southern fun-loving guy. I just want to like coach football and all this stuff. And he's like, the way I get through my players is like, by trusting them and not, pushing them too hard. And he always warns them that they're going to push him too hard. And then at one point, Boone is like, stop coddling them.
Absolutely.
So that's why they're at arms all the time.
Yeah. I think also, if we get back to Julius and Gary a little bit, I think a very important scene that we didn't cover with them is where they're at training and Julius and Gary are talking, and Gary kind of pulls Julius to the side and he's like, listen, we all need to work together. And Julius says, no, you're going to get yours and I'm going to get mine. Mm-hmm. And Gary's like, that's no way we lead a team. And he's like, I don't care about leading a team. I care about myself. Effectively.
And part of the reason he still says like that is because he feels like all the other white players aren't holding up their end of the bargain as far as helping out their teammates. Exactly. And I don't even know if it's like he's inherently selfish. I just think that's also part of it. He's like, I'm going to look out for my people. Yeah. It's like, I'm going to look out for my people. Yeah.
And then after Coach Boone, talks some sense into everyone and they start playing together, left side, strong side, they start shoving each other at practice, and then they end up having a bond, and they end up bonding there. And by the time they get back, they're incredibly friendly with each other.
They're the best friends, pretty much.
They're best friends. Gary is about to go down to the Berg to shoot hoops with Julius and his friends, but Gary's mom doesn't let him because Gary's mom is still prejudiced at this point.
Also, I mean, apparently she wants him to go to church, and I'm trying to think I feel like that's also part of it because it's like I think I'll be honest. I think it's half racism, half she wants him to go to church because it is Sunday, and you know how like people are with that stuff. Obviously, when you're religious, you go to church on Sunday. Yeah, and there's just a flat out conflict, where you're saying I don't care about. I just want to, play with my friends.
Exactly, and I think that as we see the movie go on, Julius finally gets invited over to Gary's house. And he meets Gary's mom, and Gary's mom is still kind of
she's nervous, because she has prejudices that are
and we see from a view outside of Julius giving her a hug after she
picks her up in the air.
After she goes to shake his hand, he picks her up in the air. And then Julius and Gary are inseparable. They play very well together. They're like a 1-2 punch of defensive end and linebacker. And then when Gary gets in the car accident, Julius is the only person that's allowed to meet him, which is really interesting because at the beginning of this movie, there would have been no chance of that. So I think with the movie ending with Julius arm in arm with Gary's mom, it's a really nice symbolic thing to show that, the racism in the town is kind of done and over. And, everyone's pretty much integrated at this point. Everyone was able to change their views because of this football team.
Yeah. Okay. I think we ought to wrap it up.
Yeah,
Honestly.
let's wrap it up. So do you have any words to sum up Remember the Titans?
I mean, this podcast is probably for people who watch these movies, and sorry that there will be spoilers, but oh well, that's just what you're gonna get.
Mhm.
Anyway, yeah, just sum up this movie. Just like go see it. If you haven't seen it, go see it. If you want to watch it again, watch it again. It's pretty rewatchable, as I said before, and I think you'll learn a lot about race and having to deal with people that aren't exactly like you. I think that's an important thing for everyone to learn, regardless of their age, gender, or whatnot. I think it's important, and you're just gonna. It's fun because there are parts where it's just funny, and it will give you a smile on your face. And there are a lot of parts that are very heartfelt and kind of tough to watch because of racism and various things. But I think it's an important lesson that everyone should learn about just learning to connect with other people.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's sum up this episode. Remember the Titans. I agree with a lot of those points from Jacob. This is strangely enough, it's a very lighthearted movie about race overall. Yeah. I think that this is the movie to watch if you're with a younger audience and you kind of want to just educate them a little bit on like race and stuff like that. This is probably the movie to watch because it has a very lighthearted approach to it. There are a few serious scenes, but there's not a lot of cursing. There's not a lot of anything. It's a very heartwarming movie. It's almost pretty much all Disney-fied.
Yeah, it's PG. I mean,
PG.
That's what's PG.
Yeah. So, okay. So next week we're going to cover the movie Moneyball. Do you have any words about Moneyball that you want to share with the audience before we end for the day?
I am very, very, very excited to cover Moneyball. It's probably it might be my favorite sports movie of all time. I barely talk about it. That's how much I love it. I'm like speechless. That's how much I love Moneyball. And I cannot wait to cover it on this podcast. And I hope that for our viewers, whoever you may be, however far and few in between, that you can appreciate this movie just as much as I do, although I think that's going to be pretty hard.
All right. This has been the first episode of the We Love Sports Movies podcast. I'm your host, Matt Blaustein, signing off. Thanks for watching.